Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Liquid IV. In heart-pumping moments, you need hydration that can keep up. That's where Liquid IV comes in. Scientifically formulated to quickly replenish electrolytes and fluids lost from your well-earned sweat session. Hydrate your favorite mode of movement with Liquid IV, made with triple the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 vitamins and nutrients. Also available and sugar-free. Tear, pour, live more. Visit liquidiv.com to learn more.
This episode is brought to you by Greenlight. Get this. Adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Spotify. Greenlight.com/Spotify.
No, Gavin, you don't get to celebrate. You didn't come on to like episode 50 or 60. Wait another year. Ass.
The following podcast contains...
Only I didn't say fudge.
And for gosh sake, watch your language.
Watch your profanity.
Right, I'm sorry.
explicit language.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that asks a simple question. When you tossed your dart at a map and launched your invasion force where it landed, what the hell were you thinking? I'm your host, Dave Bledsoe, and this is finally episode number 500. We made it, y'all. Who's Afraid of Grenada edition of the show, where we talk about that time we launched a multi-million-dollar military action to give some medical students a lift home. Stay tuned. The What the Hell Are You Thinking podcast is brought to you by the Grenadian Tourist Board, who invites you to try a little pure Grenada. When it comes to planning your next vacation, why not go off the beaten path and visit Grenada? From our pristine white beaches to our refreshing highland waterfalls, Grenada has all the Caribbean has to offer without the crowds. Americans, Grenada's official language is English, so you won't even have to pretend to try. And when it comes time to plan your next trip to the island, why not spice up your adventure with the Nutmeg Island and try a little pure Grenada?
Interrupt our regularly scheduled program to bring you an NBC News report. Grenada Invasion, late report.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Brokaw, NBC News in New York, and here is the latest situation as we now know it on the island of Grenada, which is a tiny island, as you know, in the southern Caribbean. It has been invaded by a multinational force, as it's being described. The bulk of that force, about 1,800 American troops. That includes Marines and apparently airborne troops as well, and about 300 troops from some islands around Grenada. They were sent there by President Reagan from Barbados early this morning, he says, at the request of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. Those are the island nations around Grenada. Grenada is an island country that is now in the control of a Marxist military council after its Marxist prime minister was executed in a military coup just last week. There are about 1,000 American medical students on the island. The president said he was sending the troops in there to protect those students, but the chancellor of the medical school said that they were all right, and if there is any loss of life, the blame will be President Reagan's. At this time, we don't know if there have been any casualties. There have been reports of casualties, however, both from the Pentagon and from Cuba. Cuba is now saying that its construction workers at a big airport, about 9,000-foot runway at the southern tip of the island, fought, in the words of Cuba, heroically against what were described as Yankee invaders.
There was a violent murder at Acre Air Force Base, my first duty station in the Air Force.
Okay, that's an interesting story.
It seems that in the wee hours of the morning, some monster had crept up and brutally attacked Ira, who lived by a small lake near the base golf course. When the groundskeepers of the golf course came in the following morning, they found Ira in a pool of his own blood. They frantically called 911, and the base police responded to the scene. An investigation was started. Photographs were taken. They even took some plaster cast of the tire tracks found in the mud nearby.
Pretty standard stuff.
Then, Ira was shoved in a bag, and feathers were all swept up, and everyone went on with their day.
I'm sorry. Did you say you...
Feathers? Yeah, you see, Ira was a swan. It seems the base commander's wife had attained 2 swans, Ira, named after Ira Aker, the base's namesake, and his swan wife, Ruth, who was named for Ira Aker's wife. And our general's wife was very upset about the grisly death of Ira the swan. Thing was, it was pretty well known who exactly killed Ira. It was Buffy.
Vampire Slayer?
No, a German Shepherd, a military working dog, part of the very police agency charged with investigating Ira's brutal murder. Long story short, Buffy's handler had been down by the golf course on a midnight shift. He let Buffy out to take shit, and Ira hissed or honked or whatever it is the fuck the swans do, and that was enough to trigger Buffy into doing what large dogs trained to attack things do, and Buffy promptly grabbed Ira by the neck and killed him. Faced with pissing off the base commander by explaining what happened, or an over-the-top performative act designed to appear as though something were being done, when in reality what was being done was obfuscation and distraction from the facts, the natural choice was, of course,
cover it up.
So a serious investigation was conducted to find out what or who might have killed Ira the Swan. Thus the photographs, the cast, the review of the surveillance tapes from the nearby nuclear aircraft alert parking apron, all to determine if, say, a cabal of Satanists had done it.
Satanists, huh?
Yeah, the satanic panic was still in full swing, and maybe they had done something terrible to Ira as part of some sick ritual. The only evidence anyone found was some dog-like footprints in the mud nearby, which obviously were left by Buffy, but the official finding of the investigation was, of course,
maybe it's coyotes.
And that was sufficient to please the base commander. The lesson in all this is sometimes the right bullshit story is exactly what you need to divert attention away from the thing you don't want people to pay attention to. It works with dead swans, and it also works when you need to distract an electorate when you fucked up really, really bad as a president. Which brings me to this week's topic for part 2 of Summer Series 2025. The time the United States invaded a tiny, insignificant speck of an island in the Caribbean to keep people from thinking about how badly the president and the military had fucked up somewhere else. We are, of course, talking about 1983's Invasion of Grenada. But first...
oh, God, not this shit again.
We should talk about the history of Grenada, because you know damn well you probably didn't know the place existed until I introduced it in the show. Grenada is an island nation of the Caribbean Sea, the southernmost of the Windward Isles. It is directly south of St. Vincent's and about 100 miles off the coast of Trinidad on the South American mainland. Columbus sighted the island on his third voyage to Americas, and it was settled by the Carib people who vigorously resisted colonization by the Europeans for close to 150 years. It was the French who finally broke the resistance of the indigenous people and came and established plantations, importing African slaves to work on them.
Bunch of assholes.
The island was ceded to the British on the Treaty of Paris in 1763 and remained a British colony until 1967, and then it became a Commonwealth nation. In 1974, it was granted full home rule. The island is famous for nutmeg. Originally an Indonesian crop, the climate of Grenada was perfect for growing the spice, and it remains a major export crop today, providing some 40% of the world's primary pumpkin spice. Since it was a British possession, the official language is English, with a French Creole still lingering in some quarters. Today, tourism is the primary economic driver, followed by spice crops and a few other agricultural exports. Grenada is far enough from the main tourist routes that it remains fairly obscure to North Americans. Much of its tourist trade comes from South American nations. The island is still part of the UK Commonwealth of Nations, and King Charles is the titular head of the nation's government. Practical government is representative parliamentary democracy, headed by a prime minister. It has no military except for a small national police force and a coast guard. It is a part of the Organization of American States, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and is a signatory to the United Nations Treaty on Nuclear Proliferation. They're against it and are not developing their own nuclear weapon.
Thank God for that.
The nation has good relations with the United States, cooperating on drug enforcement, mutual legal assistance, and extraditions. It has a U.S. ambassador and mutual embassies, and maintains a United Nations mission in New York City. They also enjoy cordial relations with the nations of Cuba and Venezuela, and are a member of ALBA.
Is that Jessica Alba?
No, the Alianza Boliviana para los Pueblos de Nuestra America, or the Bolivian Alliance of the Peoples of Our America. It's a trade organization, but a more socialist, well, slightly more socialist bent. Grenada has a little bit of a history with socialism. In the mid-1970s, it went through a protracted period of quasi-civil war as Marxist groups gained and lost power, culminating in a full-blown bloodless coup in 1979 when a Marxist government took power and began forming close relationships with Cuba and Nicaragua, calling itself the People's Revolutionary Government, led by a man named Maurice Bishop. This, as you might imagine, did not sit well with the United States government. However, in 1979, there were some rather more pressing matters occupying our military-industrial complex, as we learned last week. But the United States have never been one to forget a communist takeover, so Grenada simmered quietly on the back burner at the Pentagon and the CIA until circumstances all of a sudden made it a priority. You see, after the honeymoon phase that was unfortunately prolonged by the poor aim of John Hinckley Jr., friend of the pod, Ronald Reagan,
he said it!
His approval ratings had hit the skids hard. By January of 1983, he was in Trumpian levels of negatives after a lackluster 82 midterms left him with a continued split Congress, with GOP holding the House and the Democrats holding the Senate. Old Dutch, well, he was in a doldrum. His economic reforms had not stopped yet another recession, and inflation was still troublingly high, and his foreign policy goals had only made him seem like a ravening warmonger, but that's only because he was. Worse than that, Lebanon was becoming the huge pain in the Gipper's behind, to put it in his parlance. Americans were getting snatched off the streets and held hostage, despite Ronnie's insistence that wasn't going to happen on his watch. Israel had launched a war in Lebanon that threatened to spiral out of control into a general Middle East war, and the United States and a smattering of other nations put troops in Beirut to act as peacekeepers. Reagan deployed 800 Marines into the city for what was supposed to be a short-term operation, but like most short-term operations in that part of the world, it went rather longer than expected. There were multiple incidents during the deployment, and October 23rd, 1983, saw a massive truck bomb driven by suicide bombers detonating inside the perimeter of the Marine barracks, killing 241 U.S. Marines. Now, I hear some of you asking, Dave, what the fuck does this have to do with Grenada? And that's a fair question, one which I will answer in detail in approximately 8 minutes.
Damn it, Dave.
As I mentioned earlier, the government of Grenada had been taken over by the Marxists in a bloodless coup in 1979. The New Jewel Party, led by Maurice Bishop, told the United Nations what his government stood for shortly thereafter. Quote, "Indeed, our revolution in Grenada is a people's revolution. And as such, one of the fundamental principles of our revolution is the establishment of people's rights. Among these rights, we include the right to equal pay for men and women, the right to social and economic justice, the right to work, the right to democratic participation in the affairs of the nation. At the same time, we also have a firm commitment to the establishment of people's right in the international community. And as such, we firmly oppose imperialism, colonialism, neocolonialism, apartheid, racism, including Zionism, and fascism. More than this, we strongly condemn any attempt by any country to maintain any of these hostile and repugnant systems, and for this reason, we particularly join in the chorus of support for an application demanding mandatory sanctions against the racist state of South Africa, as is provided in Chapter 7 of the Charter of the United Nations." Unquote. Also from Wikipedia, quote, "Under Bishop's leadership, the National Women's Organization was formed to participate in policy decisions along with other social groups. Women were given equal pay and paid maternity leave. Sex discrimination was made illegal. Organizations for education, healthcare, and youth affairs were established." Unquote. I should point out at the same time, the New Jewel Party was preventing new elections and suppressing opposition. It was all pretty standard business for an aspiring Central American strongman authoritarian populism mixed with repression that works for both sides of the political spectrum. But in addition to this, Bishop began buddying up with Cuba's Fidel Castro. Castro, for his part, was just enjoying fucking with the United States, and Bishop was just another match in the long-running game between Cuba and the USA. Grenada was not of any real strategic importance, however, and the U.S. government was content to let Bishop play dictator on his tiny, distant, and unremarkable island. There simply wasn't anything on Grenada worth the trouble of worrying about it. But that was until Maurice Bishop and Grenada began building the airport. Then called the Point Salines Airport, and now named in a really ironic twist, the Maurice Bishop International Airport, had been planned as far back as 1954. The United Kingdom had wanted to build an airport capable of handling modern, for the time, jet aircraft to increase tourism to the island. Being a part of the Commonwealth, the UK financed the construction, and the facility was designed in Canada, and a London firm was doing the building. However, there were other nations who assisted with the financing, including Libya, Algeria, and Cuba.
Those sneaky bastards.
The United States claimed that this airport was not to bring plane loads of pasty Canadians down from Toronto to get sunburns and drink rum drinks with tiny umbrellas, because the runway could also accommodate the largest Soviet military transport aircraft. I mean, it could also just totally handle like large body passenger sets like the 747, but that's not really important to the Reagan administration. From a March 1983 New York Times article, quote, President Reagan, in his televised address to the nation this week, cited the construction of a 10,000-foot runway in the small Caribbean island of Grenada as evidence of what he called Soviet-Cuban militarization of that tiny country of 110,000 inhabitants. Grenada doesn't even have an air force, the president said, showing a satellite photograph of the airstrip. Who is it intended for? Unquote. 747's full of fat Canadian tourists. But I digress. A Democratic congressman who actually went to Grenada told the House, as quoted in Wikipedia, quote, based on my personal observations, discussion and analysis of the new international airport under construction in Grenada, it's my conclusion that this product is specifically now and has always been for the purpose of economic development and not for military use. It is my thought that this is absurd, patronizing, and totally unwarranted for the United States government to charge that this airport poses a military threat to United States national security, unquote. The idea that Grenada, which again is 100 miles off the South American coast, was soon going to be a Soviet-Cuban military outpost replete with squadrons of MiGs and Bear bombers poised to dominate the skies over the Caribbean was simply an opportunity the Reagan administration could not pass up. A young lieutenant colonel on the National Security Council was put in charge of drawing up hypothetical plans to do something about Grenada, plans that were advanced enough to be practiced in the summer of '83 on the Puerto Rican island of Vieques, and we talked about that brash young officer in episode number 494 and 495 of this here podcast.
That's a plug.
At the same time, things in Grenada were not going well. Maurice Bishop's government had done shockingly well turning around the economic situation, but things were starting to stall out. Construction was slowed at the airport, and the government was starting to fray at the seams. There was unrest in the streets, and the tiny Grenadan army...
There's 4 guys in that truck.
...put the country under martial law to restore order. Bishop was arrested by the government and placed on house arrest, only to be freed by his supporters shortly afterwards. There were small, but bitter gun battles in the streets. Martial law was declared and curfews were put over the tiny island. Bishop and his supporters were captured by the government forces and, following the tradition of the islands, lined up against the wall and shot. In Bishop's place, a military government was established and things were starting to calm down. You might be wondering how this coup on a UK Commonwealth island over 1,100 miles from the United States cost thousands of troops and millions of dollars to be expended when it literally had nothing to do with our national interest. Well... The reason is, ostensibly, a teenage medical student got scared and called their mommy. St. George's University School of Medicine in the capital of Grenada was, and indeed is, a medical school. It's not the best medical school. It's not the worst. But suffice to say, it isn't giving Yale or Harvard any worry. Caribbean medical schools are so-called second chance institutions for students who do not quite make the cut to any of the nearly 200 med schools in the United States. Fully accredited, meaning they meet the same academic standards as the United States-based medical schools, their entry requirements are just lower. The best of the best go to U.S. schools, and the rest of the best head for the islands.
Ah, very diplomatic.
The reason I mention this is the American medical students at St. George provided the entire pretext for the invasion of Grenada, despite the fact that they were in no danger whatsoever. Remember a few minutes ago I mentioned the fiasco in Lebanon? Well, now I'm going to explain it. The Reagan administration needed something quick, easy, and pre-planned to divert the simple-minded Americans' attention span from a gross fuck-up that could only lead to a big war, so they pulled the trigger on a little war that Ollie North had been saving for a rainy day. Codenamed Operation Urgent Fury because it was urgent to furiously distract the media from Beirut. And if you think I'm just being snarky, then here's Defense Secretary at the time, Caspar Weinberger, as quoted in Thought.co. Quote, in a 2002 interview, Reagan's Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger recalled, well, we were planning that very weekend for the actions in Grenada to overcome the anarchy that was down there and the potential seizure of American students and all the memories of the Iranian hostages, unquote. The United States State Departments wrangled a few of Caribbean nations on board with the promises of future help and claimed the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States had asked the United States to invade to restore order and, of course, rescue those medical students who,
allegedly
were at risk of being held hostage by the communist government of Grenada. More from thought.co. Quote, on the morning of October 25th, 1983, the United States, supported by the Caribbean Defense Force, real terrors on the battlefield, I'm sure, invaded Grenada. The U.S. contingents totaled 7,600 troops for the Army, Marines, Navy, and the Air Force. The Allied invading force was opposed by 1,500 Grenadian troops and 700 armed Cuban military engineers working on the expansion of the Port Salines Airport, unquote. Elements of the 75th Ranger Regiment, 82nd Airborne, and 2nd Battalion of the 8th U.S. Marines were dropped and landed on the white sand beaches of the tiny island to seize the airport's capital and secure the medical school. Special Forces operators like Delta Force and Navy SEALs were inserted prior to the invasion to snatch specific government and foreign military advisors, radio and television stations, and secure intelligence for the troops that would follow. Amphibious landing ships launched helicopters and attack bombers deployed from an aircraft carrier. Bomb targets and heavy artillery and armored vehicles were sent ashore to support the invasion forces, most of whom were using tourist maps with grids drawn on them because apparently Ollie's plans didn't think to include actual detailed topographical maps of the island during his long planning sessions. To their credit, despite being outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed by the best American troops the Reagan administration had to offer, the tiny Grenadian military and a few hundred Cubans did not lie down and take it, and they fought back as hard as they could. Anti-aircraft fire took down a Navy helicopter, killing one of the pilots. The vaunted Navy SEALs faced a stiff battle trying to get the Governor General Scone, the Commonwealth representative that allegedly invited the U.S. invasion, off the island and were trapped in his mansion for 24 hours until relieved by a Marine force. There were ambushes, firefights, friendly fire casualties for 2 days until the government forces finally capitulated on the 3rd. It was not bloodless. Again from thought.co. Quote, a total of almost 8,000 U.S. soldiers, sailors, and airmen and Marines, along with 353 of the Caribbean peace forces, participated in Operation Urgent Fury. The United States forces suffered 19 killed and 116 wounded. Combined Cuban and Grenadian military forces sustained 70 killed, 417 wounded, and 638 captured. In addition, at least 24 civilians were killed in the fighting. The Grenadian military suffered a crippling loss of weapons, vehicles, and equipment, unquote. There are actually significant questions about the medical students ever being in danger. None of the medical students reported being threatened by the government forces, though they did say the sound of distant gunfire between the factions was frightening. According to a New York Times post-invasion roundup article, quote, government officials had also been in close contact with Mr. Modica, that was the chancellor of the university, who believed before the invasion had been attempted to set up discussions between the United States officials and the leaders of the coup. Mr. Modica said that his main objective was to arrange for the safety of the school students and the staff on Grenada. And I felt that I had gotten those assurances from the new military leaders, said Mr. Modica, noting that he was shocked on hearing word of the invasion on Tuesday morning, unquote. Other medical students didn't start worrying until after the invasion had begun. From a different New York Times article, quote, another student, Victoria Sakuro, 24, of Hackensack, said that until the invasion began, her concern had been prepping for an anatomy lecture and studying for exams. When the carrier-based fighters began strafing the nearby airfield, she and her roommates suddenly huddled together under their beds. Every time there was a footstep in the hallway, Ms. Sakaro said, we were terrified because we thought they might be Russian or Cuban soldiers. The discovery that the invaders were Americans, she said, brought hope for an evacuation and a sense of security, unquote. Once the fighting was over, the U.S. troops stayed on the ground for the next 5 months. Many of the deployed troops characterized the invasion as 5 minutes of fighting and 5 months of surfing. The Cubans and other Soviet bloc citizens on the island were quickly repatriated, and a new Grenada interim government was established and elections were held the following year. Queen Elizabeth herself visited the island when the new parliament was seated, which brings me to the scariest part of the entire goddamn invasion.
Mrs. Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, she was pissed that the United States had invaded without advance warning and definitely without British approval, on what was technically a territory of the British Empire. When informed of the invasion, Thatcher sent back a message which reads, according to The Guardian, quote, "I must tell you that the decision which you describe causes us the greatest concern. I cannot conceal that I am deeply disturbed by your communication. You asked for my advice, and I have sent it to you, and hope that even at this late stage you will take it into the account before these events are irrevocable," unquote. Which, I know, that seems a little bland to the American ear, but if you understand Britishism, you know that this was actually much, much closer to...
Are you out of your fucking mind?
Reagan reportedly replied, "Well, increasingly concerned by Grenada's recent drift into the Soviet bloc, it's clear that Grenada has now been taken over by a group of leftist thugs who are likely to align themselves with Cuba and the Soviet Union to an even greater degree than their previous government," unquote. Which, if you were at all familiar with Americanism, reads exactly like,
"Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker."
At home, the operation played well. It did distract from Lebanon. Grenada was the first war covered by CNN, though no CNN reporters were allowed on the ground. Americans were generally positive. The Washington Post reported the polling in the weeks after, quote, "Public approval of President Reagan's handling of the invasion of Grenada appears to have produced wide-ranging political benefits for him," according to a new Washington Post ABC News opinion poll. For the first time since April, Reagan has edged ahead of the two leading Democratic candidates in the trial heats for the 1984 election, and his overall popularity is higher than at any time since September 1981. Opinion analysts said that this kind of rallying around the president often occurs during a crisis, and that there's no way of knowing how long it will last, unquote. Also, it did get our national dick hard, since this was the first time the United States had successfully invaded a country since Vietnam, despite the fact that the country was the size of a goddamn postage stamp. October 25th is celebrated in modern Grenada as Thanksgiving, Liberation Day. The island today is entirely peaceful, if not entirely prosperous. It's the 9th poorest developing nation in the world. Politically, it is a bog-standard island democracy, a little corrupt, but not so corrupt that anyone wants to do anything about it. In 2000, a Truth and Reconciliation Committee was impaneled to deal with the lingering bitterness over 1983. As a part of their work, a search was made for Maurice Bishop's body without success. Bishop has been somewhat rehabilitated, if not exonerated. The airport that spurred this invasion does bear his name, after all. All in all, a few days after the invasion, Grenada returned to a sleepy, distant island it was before Reagan used it to deflect his political issues at home. And yes, I realize I have not presented any evidence that Grenada was a cynical effort to divert attention away from an embarrassing situation of far greater importance in the Middle East.
Look, we need evidence, okay?
And while I pointed out there was no compelling national interest in sending troops, that the American medical students were in no danger, how the government of the United Kingdom, our strongest ally in the Cold War, did not see a need to intervene. But that isn't proof, which is actually kind of hard to come by. Oliver North and his daddies in the National Security Council never wrote a memo detailing the scheme, or if they did, Fawn Hall put it through the shredder. Some might make the argument that the 2 days between the bombing make the idea risible. But also, we know that the United States had had these plans in a binder on the shelf for at least 2 years. It's entirely plausible that Reagan or Weinberger or even Poppy Bush made a quick decision to run with Operation Distract America and grab the first available option that had low risk and little opposition, and that was Grenada. All I can tell you is as soon as the shooting stopped, the accusations started as Congress, the media, and the American people started putting 2 and 2 together and arrived at seeing the invasion for what it was for. Wendell Bell, a professor emeritus of sociology at Yale University, wrote in 1986, quote, "Although the invasion of tiny Grenada probably will not go down in history as one of the more earth-shaking incidents of our troubled age, it's nonetheless significant as near perfect illustration of the use of prophecy to justify present action. The Reagan administration gave the American people and the people of the world 3 principal reasons for actions, and all of them in the form of contingent statements about the future. That is, what would have happened if there had been no invasion. Although we cannot tell who among the American leaders, including the president himself, believed these prophecies at the moment of crisis, we suspect that none of the 3 was credible," unquote. In the end, the consequences of the invasion of Grenada and coincidentally the Beirut bombing were, I guess, pretty light. The United States was officially denounced in the United Nations. Margaret Thatcher gave Reagan the cold shoulder for a couple of weeks. The medical students got a Christmas break started a little early. And there was an anti-war march in Washington, D.C. I mean, even young Bernie Sanders was there at that very small, very, very forgotten anti-war march. I mean, so everything got off pretty light. Of course, you don't count the 19 killed and 116 wounded on the United States side, the Cubans that had 25 killed, 50 and 59 wounded, and the 638 combatants captured, and of course the Grenadians who got 45 killed and 358 wounded, including 24 civilians who were also killed, 18 of which died in an accidental bombing of a Grenadian mental hospital. Oopsie! But hey, at least we got a very, very bad, so bad it's good, Clint Eastwood movie out of it.
We're going to war, men. To the island of Grenada to assist in rescuing American citizens there.
Get on your feet, Highway!
With all due respect, sir, you're beginning to bore the hell out of me.
Clint Eastwood, Heartbreak Ridge.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by MeUndies. Underwear drawers are like the Wild West. You never know what you're going to pull out or what shape it's in. So upgrade your collection with the buttery soft comfort of MeUndies. MeUndies' signature fabric is as soft as a warm hug from your favorite sweater. Plus, it's breathable and oh so comfy, making it ideal for all-day wear. Get 20% off your first order, plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/Spotify with code SPOTIFY. That's MeUndies.com/Spotify, code SPOTIFY.
That is it for the show this week. And for part 2 of the summer series for 2025, You Can Have a Little War as a treat. Finally made it to episode 500, y'all. 10 years of this dumb show and 500 episodes plus like 70, 75 more that don't quite count in the official tally. God damn. That's a lot of podcasting. Can't believe I've been doing it. Can't believe y'all been listening. But I'm really glad I waited to get here because I've had this topic rolling around on the topic hopper for years and years and years. It's just so very Reagan-esque. I'm glad I saved it for a special occasion. Next week in part 3, we head to the next dumbest made-for-TV military operation, something that I like to call history's most expensive drug raid. So if that sounds fun for you, rate and review us so other people can find us, ride along, and then maybe kick us $1 at patreon.com/whatthehellpodcast. We'll use that money to pay for our boat drinks on our military operations. Do all the things Jeremy tells you to do in the closing credits, otherwise he will force us to go to a podcasting school in the Caribbean. And so for me, Dave, visit beautiful Grenada, Bledsoe, producer.
I still can't believe the Iron Lady let him do that.
Gavin, and all the fictional surfing Marines on this show, we want to say, Grenada, we love you. You're one spicy item. And we'll see you all next week for part 3 of Summer Series 2025.
In the winter when it's dreary and cold, Grenada, you are there to warm up my soul. You will forever be the land of spice. Yes, you are truly a paradise. Oh, little isle of mine, I know you are blessed, full of tranquility and happiness. I want you to know that I am never ashamed. Wherever I go, I keep shouting your name.
What the Hell Were You Thinking stars Dave Bledsoe and features Gavin St. James and several fictional minions. The show is produced by Kimberly Steele and a part of the Seltzer Kings podcast network. You can find more information on the show on their website, whatthehellpodcast.com, or on Facebook as What the Hell Podcast. Thanks for listening.
I have no ending for this, so I take a small bow.
Case in point, Manuel Noriega.
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.